I think we're live. If not, our audio has let us down quite significantly. But hey, man, we've tested it and we've tested it again. And the beautiful thing about not having a single viewer on day one is we have all the room in the world to make all the necessary errors that we need to. So I'm excited here to be on episode of Modern Mindset, first episode of all time, something that's been a long time coming. And I'm super pumped to be here with my co-host Camille, someone that I've been chatting with for a very long time about bringing the show Modern Mindset to life. Something that we've been talking about for a long time, but talk is cheap. I think we've been talking about it for almost too long, and we finally sat our ass down and said, "Listen, we can't make excuses anymore. We can't wait for the world to open up doors and make it easy for us to get side by side. Let's make this happen so we can share some of our valuable insights and our takeaways and our experiences with the world." So, Camille, I am so excited to be able to do this with you, man. Talk to me a little bit about the journey that resulted in today's podcast, because I think this journey was at least 2 years in the making.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm excited too that we finally get to do this. It's hard to explain exactly everything that went on to go on for us to be here today, but we started out a year ago with you inviting me onto your podcast, and that was my very first time on a recorded interview. And we had a very interesting conversation to say the least, and that led to a series of more conversations around Clubhouse and in general our Zoom meetings once a week were in that same kind of level. And we thought, with all the stuff we talk about, why not share it to the public as well? Because, like you said, we have a lot of, well, let's say unique experiences that provided us these kind of insights that allow us to see things in a different way that can be beneficial for people. And we see the effects of it in what we do with our social media accounts, with your podcast. I'm sure as well the viewers have shared with you that they are very appreciative of everything you share. And from there, I think us creating a podcast was always something we talked about. Uh, just, I guess, the execution and the equipment and all of that was a little bit of a barrier, but we finally have it, and I'm excited that we get to do this.
I mean, we tested our own theory, right? Because we talked about how people will constantly make up excuses to not take action, and usually they'll blame it on their inability to execute. And we were having that same challenge. It's like we had an idea, but we were always like, okay, lockdown is making it difficult. Okay, we're not making it easy with the equipment that we have. Okay, like Zoom and online virtual version is never going to be as good. And the reality is there is no replacement for those organic in-person conversations that you and I have, that especially when we don't know there's a microphone there, right? Like when we're actually sitting down and chatting, it really brings out the side of us that no matter how hard we try to bring it out in podcasting, we can't. But we say, what's better, right? Like what's better, not giving any content at all, or doing the best that we can to get comfortable in an environment like this and providing some thoughts and ideas. You started the story by talking about how you were on my podcast show, but I actually think the story started long before that, because you and I spent a lot of time over the lockdown period connecting over a lot of difficult challenges in our life. And I imagine that over the episodes that we release on this podcast, we're really going to get grounded and talk about a lot of the challenges that we've overcome that can really, really go deep. Like, without a doubt, at least one episode per hour of conversation we've had. And I have no doubt that's going to come out in future episodes. But it was in those conversations that I said, man, I wish I even selfishly had the opportunity to go back and re-listen to these conversations, because I can't stress how much one good conversation can change your life. One good conversation, because sometimes people wait for that miracle moment, something that looks extravagant, like fireworks in the sky, a sign of from God saying, hey, you can make a change in your life, and their life changes. But I've noticed over and over in my life that the biggest changes that I've made has constantly been through great conversations with individuals that not only inspire me but also challenge me. And you've done that to me in many conversations where it actually results in me leaving thinking a little bit more about what we talked about, maybe even researching it on my own time, but then resulting months later that that conversation sparked something in the back of my brain that inspired me so much that made me want to change my life completely. Can I get more of that? And can I supply those sparks for other people that listen in, which essentially resulted in me bringing you to my podcast show? And I remember you walking in, and I remember you reflecting on your experience after, and you telling me how nervous you were, which, by the way, is not surprising in a podcast environment, right? Like it is very common. I mean, I felt it at the beginning of this one, and I've been podcasting for about 4 years now. And you came in and you told me after that you were freaking out. I didn't notice you were freaking out. I think you did a very good job. In fact, I think you were one of the best first time podcaster I've ever sat down with.
Oh, thank you.
And I think that, oh, and over the years of since then, you've actually even gotten better, which makes me very excited for this show. But you did such a good job that it was even more surprising to me after that when I started seeing that your episode became one of the most listened to episodes in my podcast show. And my podcast show, Ride With Me, has over 130 episodes. So when you're one of the most listened to, like you're less than 1%, like take that in. It's quite insane. And I think more than anything else, that was a, yet another sign, like standing on a scale and seeing what your weight is yet another indicator that we're on the right track, that people need to hear more of these conversations. There's a demand for this. And can we bring it out in a different way? And what was first going to be what I thought was going to be a Clubhouse approach, which I have to admit was a lot of fun because the Clubhouse app gave us the opportunity to go on a virtual stage, and it allowed us to speak with the audience right away. People would frequently jump on stage with us and chat with us in this virtual world, and that was fun. But we came full circle. We came right back around and said, let's save these recordings and really do it by our own rules and not rely on the rules that are set up by these social media applications, but rather do it in a way where we just hit record and jam as long as we can, make the errors that we're meant to make the human errors that we're going to make with podcasting, but result with getting our ideas out there at the end of the day. And I was very, very happy when you not only accepted, but really pushed the idea of keeping it as raw as possible. The backgrounds that you see here, I entertained a lot of virtual backgrounds, but we always came back to our original one saying, let's just keep it raw. And the name never changed. The name was the first name we ever came up with together when you and I hung out a couple of years ago. And the name was always meant to be the modern mindset. And I want to start with that as today's conversation with
Yeah.
you is the words modern mindset, especially modern, right? Mindset is a word that's been used since the test of time. When you look up the word mindset, you'll find some of the oldest philosophers and personal development leaders and coaches use the word mindset in different ways and how it should be utilized. But we decided to use the word modern. And I wanted to get your take on what modern mindset means to you, whether it's by definition or just your experience. I'm quite curious to see why you and I both came together with the word modern mindset. And I'd love to define that as best as we can in today's episode.
Well, for me, I kind of have an interesting view on it. At least I find it interesting that I feel like society in general now is very outcome based. And it seems that we live in this information age where we kind of lose the process and the underlying motivations between why we think what we think. So we prioritize facts and we don't really understand why they make sense to us. And when we do that, we stop asking why. And in fact, I believe nowadays that why has become a taboo word. Like if I ask someone why do you think that, it's almost they kind of see it as aggressive, but I'm genuinely curious. So in my life, what I've learned to do instead of asking why, I ask how so. But I ask myself why. And that to me is the reason why I feel like in our modern age, we don't. And trying to get back to that is part of what I think modern day thinking is lacking. And that's why this modern mindset is about coming back to those roots as well, recognizing that facts are important, but the underlying motivation between them and why they work is super important. And more, we're finding that people are craving that, and people want to talk about why they think the way they do, uh, and they find tremendous success and tremendous growth by doing so. So to me, the modern mindset is about trying to understand not only facts but motivation, and then trying to find what works for you as an individual, because these facts are objective, let's say, but we don't recognize that a lot of them can be subjective. And then it comes to what works for the individual, like what works for me, because I have all these lessons that I've learned through society, through my own experience, through my upbringing, through the world in general, but I don't internalize them in a way that is conducive to the person I want to be. So the modern mindset to me, again, is understanding the why, and also how does this work for me? And does this work for me, and why not, or why does it? And then trying to figure out if that's in line with the values of who I am as a person, or the values that I want to cultivate within myself. And so I think that naturally extends to everyone in general, because, like you said, I'm very grateful to hear that that my episode with you was one of the most watched. So I think people are craving that, and in this modern day age, where it seems like it's lacking, I believe there's just a natural, unconscious desire and need for that. So I'm curious about your take on it.
I my mind goes back to the clubhouse rooms that we were doing every single week for the like the last 3 months or so, and we've seen it over and over again, right? We've seen the same type of people come back. We've seen people come up on stage and said, "I am so thankful that you're talking about this." We've even seen people from big broadcasting networks, people that I never would have thought would show up in our little room when we first started, of like major broadcasting stations, reporters, and people in the world of different industries that you never would have thought would be interested in this stuff, coming up on stage and saying, "I finally found a room that I want to be part of." And that to me was extremely valuable insight. It was people that are getting a sense of refreshment, almost like they knew this is something that they needed. They just never knew that this is what it was. It takes my mind back to Richard Branson's story with Virgin Atlantic. When Richard Branson took a look at a flyer's experience and what that looks like, he one day decided that, hey, why don't we put a digital screen at the back of every airplane to give them some entertainment? It's not like someone was sitting back there and saying, "Man, I wish I had a TV screen in front of me," or "This is what I need." Is he thought far further ahead and said, "What can better the experience?" Right? And as a result of that, he provided a technology that no one knew that they needed, but they're grateful that they have. And I think of that in a personal development journey with the experience of life. Is Are you waiting to hear someone complain about the need for a lack of an ability for you to supply that, or can you almost see ahead and saying, how can we improve the quality? How can we improve the quality of life and the experience of that journey? And in many ways, I've started realizing more and more that the things that have been influencing me and bettering my life, such as great conversations, are actually very much the thing that many people are seeking for. And they've reminded us that more and more. I just yesterday announced the modern mindset is coming out for the first time in our social media, and I posted our logo and not much more. I simply mentioned that our show is about personal development and growth mindset and real stories. And the amount of comments that came pouring in of people that are excited to listen, on top of the fact that there are some people that are like, "Wow, I'm glad to see my favorite conversation from Clubhouse now being on a podcast platform." Again, the demand is there. Are we able to bring that and serve that demand? Well, I don't think that's up to us. I just think we play a role and we do the best that we can by sharing our stories. And we hope that at the end of the day, the stories will allow us to hit that spark in the back of people's head in the way that it hit mine every single time we have a conversation. And the word modern is kind of ironic to me, man, because I actually think in this specific conversation, the word modern actually means going back to who you used to be, right? Unconditioning, unlearning. And that's as much as modern seems forward thinking, innovative, and disrupting what's there. It's almost like let's take a look back and analyze and predict and make adjustments as needed. And the unlearning part comes down to the fact that we've lived a life almost always on autopilot through other people's guidance, especially when we're younger. And we're almost trusting that that guidance will result us to becoming who we want to be, and it makes sense, right? Like you can't get mad at anybody, hopefully, for the if they did it for the right reasons, right? And a lot of that comes down to what they were taught when they were younger. And when I think about my parents, when I think about my young friends that I grew up with who were just as naive as I was and didn't know any better, but were trying to learn from each other. I think about young relationships where my significant other was still trying to just figure out how to be in a relationship and her way through the ropes. And along the way, these experiences either help you grow or they leave these virtual scars that can hurt you for a very long time. And you hope at the end of the tunnel you come out better. But when you find that maybe there's parts of you that you're not happy with, or where you have this realization, as us young millennials like to call being woke, you have this realization one day that, hey, I'm not doing things because I want to. I'm only doing things because I was taught that this is the way I'm supposed to. Can you take control of your life at that moment and change things around and modify the way that you want to? I think absolutely yes. I don't think it's easy. I don't think it's overnight, but I think you can set the sail in a different direction tonight that will slowly get you there over time. And it starts with making that decision. And it starts with paying more attention to your conscious way of thinking rather than letting the subconscious side of you run you on autopilot. Because once you start becoming more conscious about the decisions you want to make, you can start paying more attention to those layers. And as you said, ask yourself those questions. Why are you doing what you're doing? How does it matter? How can you change it? And the questions that I think that gets asked results you in going down the rabbit hole and inquiring about how to do things differently. I started off this episode by talking about how the conversations with you are life changing for me. And the one that I always refer back to, just because it's easier to illustrate, because you've helped me in so many areas, but the one that's easiest to illustrate is my weight loss journey. And in my weight loss journey, I turned 35 this year in March. And I had a realization that for the first 33 years of my life, I've been doing fitness all wrong. I've been managing my health all wrong. My workouts were not correct. My eating was not correct. My lifestyle was not correct. And then in one sitting, in one patio, on one summer day, in one lounge, with one conversation with you, you were able to spark something in my head that made me say, oh, I now get it. I now understand what I did wrong. And then it made me go and research. It made me go and recalibrate my definition of what fitness is supposed to be. And in the last 2 years, I've been able to finally go from extremely overweight. And, knowing you for what, 9 years, maybe 10 years now, you've been actually able to witness my cycle of gaining weight and losing weight. You've actually seen me shred most of it away and well on my way to hitting all my goals that I've wanted to just in 2 years. And I think about that being one example of how a great conversation can result in a life changing direction. And although you're not the one that's physically making those changes for me, you inspired me and armed me with the necessary tools to do something about it. It was still up to me to do something about it, which is why I always say when you make that change, you deserve it. You're the one that took control and did it. No one told you. I credit other people for why I got the information I needed, but I still had to go out there and do it every single day. To me, it gets exciting when you think that it doesn't end at fitness. That the fact that you could do that with your financial situation, you could do that with your emotional stability, you could do that with the relationships with others. I get excited about that. And that to me is, I would say, more than anything else, the ultimate reason for why I've made those changes in my life from day to day decisions. And I don't know about you, but I'd love to get your thoughts on what conversations have done for you and maybe an example of a time where you've taken a conversation and actually really applied that in your life and made changes? Because I know there's tons. I'm just more excited to see which one you're going to pull out of the rabbit hat.
Well, I think that you know which ones I'm going to pull out. I think, especially the best example for me is like the conversations we have been life changing as well for me. I was completely against the idea of social media and sharing my thoughts and my journey with other people. And actually, it was a conversation with you after the lockdown, after after my ex and I broke up, where you encouraged me to be more open and to share. And then from there, it became talking about social media that you encouraged me and inspired me, and also made me realize that maybe I have something worth sharing like to the world because in my own um, like subconscious beating of myself up, whatever you want to call it, I thought that my ideas were not valuable enough to share. But you made me realize and inspired me to actually open up the social media account, to go on your podcast and do the interview, and then, to do Clubhouse, and now we're here. And that impact has extended to almost every aspect of my life. I mean, one, I'm a lot more open to people in general, and I see the benefits from that. I'm a lot more happy. I'm a lot more truthful, and I'm my integrity is becoming more and more firm. It's it's something that I'm truly grateful for because my idea of being conscious in the things that I want to do has provided me like this avenue of success and momentum moving forward. And the effects from that alone is just amazing. I thought that, I would completely drain myself emotionally, physically, and intellectually, but I find that I have more drive to do things, and that I'm okay with the emotional suffering. Like I can actually allow myself to feel that emotional pain, and then that allows me to get over it instead of distracting myself and avoiding my negative emotion and repeating the same patterns over again in an unconscious way, and just feeding those loops. I'm actually able to almost look at them from the outside and work on myself and becoming more of the person I want to be and more of myself. So for me, I think that one conversation. I can't even remember what I know that it was like an Airbnb, but I can't even remember uh, when it was. I think it was in March or April. I think that sparked. That sparked this. So that's the best example I could come up with.
Yeah. Yeah. It really did spark why we are in this podcast today, which is quite beautiful when you think about the role serendipity plays in our journey. And the world of serendipity and spontaneous outcomes happens more and more when you give yourself the freedom to experience life and go out there. You and I have become a really big fan of not just growing through conversations, but growing through experience as well, which then results in us having a conversation about that experience, which comes full circle again. So I think there's that element as well. But the beautiful thing about us being two completely different creatures living our own lives with very different interests is the fact that we get to learn as if we're living two lives. You don't have to live the life that I've lived as a marketer, someone who speaks on stage, someone does this podcasting, the dates that I've gone on, the relationships, the culture that I was raised under. And I don't need to do that from you in terms of the medicine side and learning about your relationship with your family, with your brother, with your parents, learning about your relationships that you were in, the good and the bad from it, and not having to live that life. And fortunately, not having to go through the pains of each other's lives as well, but still being able to take away the learnings as best as we can through conversations and being able to articulate, which is really a challenge sometimes, but it pays off if not only if we're able to articulate, but also listen, and in our mind, being able to dissect that idea in a very tangible takeaway that we can apply to our life. So I think that's where it gets fascinating because that's where we get challenged. And that's where you come back and your outlook on something that I've been through might be very different. You use social media, and I think it's a worthy example because I've built my entire career thanks to using tools like social media. And the marketing agency I work for, digital marketing and social media are two big pieces of that agency. So when you sat down and you gave me your personal take on why you feel like you're not bullish on social media, it was nice for me to be able to say, but like, have you considered these things? And it was nice that you've given the space to actually let it cloud and have a fair debate with your judge your pushbacks. A lot of people will have this defense mechanism that makes it very difficult for them to have challenging thoughts. The second they hear something that's contradictory to what they believe in, they will immediately put up this guard because they feel attacked, they feel offended, they feel like they're being manipulated. Where I think the best conversations happen is where you and I can sit down and throw ideas into the ring and be okay with the fact that there's new ideas into the ring. I actually am now even more on the extreme where I get excited when there's contradictory ideas in the ring, not because I like debating, not because I like arguing, but because I like checking my mental locks. I like checking to see, do I still believe in the things that I believe? Is there actually validity to what these contradictory thoughts are? Because if there are validity, do I actually believe in what I believe in? Is there actually a flaw in my logic? So I actually like the ability of being challenged on these thoughts. Now, fortunately, being that I've worked on myself for so many years, I don't get challenged enough where it changes my entire way of thinking because I've really allowed myself to learn through experience. But when it happens, I really let it happen. During the lockdown period, when I was no longer in a relationship, I was actually very much against going out and meeting other girls again. I was quite happy being single, and I was in a very good place in my life. And you and I sat down, and I've shared that with you. And I like to think I made a very good argument of
Oh yeah.
why being alone and happy is actually okay. That you don't need a counterpart to justify your happiness. And you came in and you threw in some fantastic ideas. I'm trying to think from the best of my recollection, and I have some thoughts of what you shared, but I want to actually see if you remember what you shared because this is kind of worth pitching to our audience for some people that might have, I think about what my reasoning was, and a big part of my reasoning from the dark side, there's a lot on the light side as well, but on the dark side, a big part of my reasoning was that I was discouraged from getting into a relationship again because my past relationships were not great, and some of them were, there were some good things that came out of it, but it left a bad taste in my mouth, and in many ways it made me shut down and saying I actually don't need to meet these people. I'm too focused on my own objectives. Do you remember what your objections were? Do you remember your pushback that made me reconsider? I have some ideas as well that I'll throw in and
Yeah.
and assist you because I know I'm making you think back almost 2 years now, maybe
Yeah.
about a year now. But do you remember the argument? So let's say someone was sitting across from you and giving you all these reasonings for the relationships from the past that's preventing them from going out again. What is something you would say to those individuals? Because I imagine there's many of those that listen to our podcast as well.
Yeah, it's very difficult for me to think back a year ago, but and especially now, it's amazing how much you can change within that year, your mindset, especially if you work on it. But I would say, you know, if you're doing it from a place of hurt and you want to improve, then why not challenge the hurt, right? Why not face the pain head on and learn from it? Invite the good and the bad. And the worst thing that can happen is what, you get hurt and you can heal yourself. You can put yourself back together and you gain new lessons and new insights. So, in a way, like you said, it's challenging uh, your mental lock boxes, I think you said, checking your mental locks, right? And who knows, maybe something will shake loose and then you'll invite something in and you'll discover more of yourself, right? When you let
Yeah.
someone in that way too, like openly, wholeheartedly, honestly, and you listen to them, you gain new insight and you learn from their experience as well. Like you said, you can grow through these amazing conversations. So why not invite more of those amazing conversations to allow yourself to grow and to challenge yourself? And think about it too. If you're alone, you can't challenge yourself on an emotional level when it comes to connecting with another person. So why not do it on your own terms and do it in a way that's conducive to your growth in that area, right? It doesn't mean you have to commit and get married, but it's just more about seeing what's out there and seeing who you are and seeing how you are in relation to that person's experience.
I'm really glad you emphasized on that you get to learn from other people part, because I think that was the part that really hit home for me. It was the emphasis where, interestingly enough, I'm almost tricking my brain into giving it a good reason to go out and date again. Right? I'm tricking it by giving it other benefits outside of going in a relationship. And you've kind of armed me with those benefits, right? One of them being the fact that you get to learn things from other people, right? You also talked about the fact that I can practice my social skills because lockdown was making it very difficult to socialize again, right? And you gave me a lot of interesting reasons that made me say, you know what? I'm going to go in with those objectives and not actually the objective of getting into a relationship. If the relationship is something that I look forward to doing as a byproduct of a good time with that individual, then hey, that's just a bonus. But I'm going to leave those dates saying I learned something, I met a cool person, and maybe, just maybe, we'll be friends if she's interested. And that to me not only inspired me to get back on the dating horse, but it actually also made it a lot easier for me to ride that horse. It made it a lot easier for me to get through those dates without the requirement of, hey, I need to get a second date, or hey, I need to make a good impression so she likes me, or hey, I need to put on this best first impression that I can so that she gives me another chance. And what happens in those areas is, not only is it, in my opinion, less fun, but it also causes a lot of anxiety, especially for someone like myself that really suffered with anxiety in the past. It brought back a lot of those jitters that makes you actually not be yourself. I remember when we were like getting friend zoned by all the girls back in the days, and we used to be like, oh, like
Yeah.
what makes you want to date a guy? Like, what are your tips? How should we be in dates? And they always say the same shit, right? They'll always say, just be yourself, just be yourself. And it always bothered me because I'm like, well, I am being myself, but you don't want to go out with me, so what the heck? But I realized, like, the be yourself is not the be yourself when you're in a social environment that you need to adapt to in order to present yourself in the best way. The be yourself is really staying true to your core of the things you believe in and standing up for it when you disagree with it. And I think that part sometimes gets tossed out the window when you have the objective of making a good first impression. We were taught when you're trying to make a good first impression is be more relatable, be more likable, be more nice. And those parts makes you throw away the disagreements and the challenges and sometimes your own hobbies and your interests out the window because you're trying to be likable. You're inflating what they're into rather than focusing on yourself. So when you go in with the objective of, let's throw out that reasoning out the door and just go in and saying, I'm just trying to learn and have a good time and create a connection, I actually get genuinely curious. Like when I'm asking why you do what you do, why you chose that program, what happened in that relationship. And I'm not just asking that because I'm trying to keep the conversation going and avoiding a silence that's going to completely destroy the date. I'm doing it because I genuinely want to leave with a story in my mind and think about it on the ride home. Interestingly enough, the girl that I'm in a relationship with right now, we're about 10 months in now, which interestingly enough, also, I met her as a result of getting back on that dating horse shortly after my conversation with you. So, in many ways, your conversation resulted in the relationship that I have, which I can honestly say is the happiest relationship I've ever been in. And I couldn't be more grateful that I got back on the dating horse when I did. But she did an interview recently and she was asked about our first date and what that looked like. And she brought up something that I even forgot that I did because I didn't do it out of strategy. I did it out of genuine curiosity. Is she said that we brought up the conversations of our past relationships and why it didn't work out. And she said that she shared the reasons why her ex didn't work out. And she said she was thrown off guard by a question that I followed up by because no one has ever asked her this question, which was simply the fact that I asked her what good came out of that relationship. Like, what did she learn from it? And it threw her off guard, and it actually made her get out of the autopilot that she was used to being on these dates, and it made her give an authentic answer. But also the rest of the date became very, very calm and peaceful because she now felt like she wasn't being judged. That instead of saying, oh, that sucks, and giving her sympathy, I was rather saying like, oh, I'm glad something good came out of it, that you became better because of it. And I noticed that the dynamic of that conversation changed. This comes back to conversation. The reason I'm sharing this is because the conversations, when you get to that level of being able to openly share and openly accept information and take judgment out the window and throw it out the window, it brings out a new side of you that I think is the best feeling in the world. You know, I leave our conversations fired up, feeling better than I've ever have. And I believe that the other person does too, because they got my 100% undivided attention at the rawest way possible with no judgment. They didn't feel like they were attacked when they left that. They left saying, wow, this was a refreshing, fantastic new conversation. So that is a level that I hope that every single conversation I have and anyone else ever has are able to get to, which is taking away judgment. And I think that's a big piece that gets in the way along with ego. Can you talk a little bit about that? You know, one thing that I've always given you credit for, Camille, is since I've known you, you know, you were one of those few people that as soon as I met you, I left saying, man, I really want to be his friend. And you've also told
Yeah.
me that I'm not the only one that tells you that. Like people tell you that, hey, for some reason they feel like they can really open up and connect with you. That to me is very rare and something I've always admired about you. Can you talk a little bit towards why you think that happens to you? Is it strategic? Is there something that you do? Is it your natural form? And then finally, what can others do to replicate that, to get to that level of conversation that many are not able to get into?
Well, thank you, first of all. Yeah, that's very, very high praise. And I remember meeting you for the first time. I thought the exact same thing of you. So it's kind of funny that we talk about that. And looking back to remembering almost 10 years ago, that's my exact same feeling. Yeah, it's kind of a strange thing. Like I almost see it as kind of like a superpower, and I'm kind of conflicted whether or not I want to know why it is, what it is I do, because I really don't do anything um, like deliberately. I feel like the only thing I would say that I do is I try to be very present and try to focus all my attention on the conversation. I find when people talk about the things they talk about, if you listen really closely and actually don't think about what you want to say in response to that, but turn that part of your brain off and actually listen to what they say and how you feel towards that, sometimes you could be surprised because what they're saying is an invitation for something much deeper. And if you have that kind of desire to just throw in what your turn or interrupt, then I think you lose out on that, and you don't see like what can be underneath that. Uh, some examples include like uh, I was talking to my mom a couple of days ago, and she was talking about her work, and then she was talking about one of her coworkers, which is a grandma, and it those two had nothing in particular. There's no reason why she brought up her coworker, even though it's her coworker at her work. But in relation to her talking about making an order, there was no reason for her to bring up her coworker. So that got me very curious, and then I tried to connect the two, and and I did that without any judgment. I was just curious. I was like, like why'd you talk about your coworker? And then from there, well, I said something along the lines of that. I don't remember specifics, but then I prod it a little bit deeper, and of course, in a way that wasn't forcing her to give any pressure. But then from just that, we started talking for an hour about what kind of grandmother she wants to be. And like that she really like that is her desire in life, and she really hopes that she can be uh, the type of person that her grandmother was to her. And then she started talking about her values for children. And I mean, that could have been an opportunity lost if I had one, you know, a lot of people are bored about hearing stories about work, right? And it seems like a very superficial conversation, but it's about being present there. And I just had that natural curiosity of why bring up that. It wasn't judgment. It wasn't you're so scatterbrained like you bring up work and then you bring up your coworker for no reason. It's about genuinely trying to understand the other person, I think. And that's something that I've had throughout my life, is that genuine curiosity for why people are the way they are and why they do things they want to do. And I try my best to practice active listening. And it's a skill. It's not necessarily a talent, I think. You really have to learn to focus. And it's very hard now, especially in this day and age, where a lot of people they can't even they can't sit down and watch a movie. They usually have their phone out if they're at home, or they're eating something. They're doing all these things at once, and it's very hard to develop that deep focus. And I think people can see that I'm hanging on their word, like every word they're saying, and I'm not looking for an opportunity to speak. I'm just focusing on what they have to say and how it makes me feel. And I express that. And the fact that I express it and be vulnerable with them, I think provides them that kind of safety that, one, I'm not judging, and two, that I'm putting myself out there too, and I'm here for you. And I think people naturally see that. At least that's what I think it is. And so, in summary, I think active listening, curiosity, and opening yourself to be vulnerable, and just paying attention how you feel to in relation to what the person shares with you.
I love that you said active listening is a skill, but like many skills, it's the good news is you can work on it, right? You can get better at it. It's if you suck at listening, that's an excuse because you're tying in your weakness as your identity, right? Like you're saying this is who I am and I can't change it, and that's complete BS. Is you can change it if you choose to work on it, just like anything else. That's a skill. And I think the active listening part is fantastic. You talk about the fact that we're talking about conversations, but the part that gets missed out is the conversations. When people picture what that looks like, they're picturing two people speaking towards each other, but you don't often think about the element that's required, which is the active listening that allows someone to respond back, then an active listening on the other side that allows them to take that response and give some feedback based on that. And that part, when you see two people and they're really vibing, I always love that. It's like, what does that
Yeah,
mean, right? Like you know what I mean? Like some people
yeah,
can't define it in words, but you can tell when you look across and you're like, man,
yeah,
those two are really vibing. I really think that's what's happening is concentrated listening that's allowing the other person to respond in response to what was said. Not just let's throw another question in the ring, but let's actually respond to what was said. Then the other person, like playing a game of tennis, needs to hit that ball back to their side of the court. And if they're both playing, it's kind of like watching an epic match, right? Like when you see a rally of two people going at it and it's just back and forth, but it's epic. That's what it looks like when people are vibing. And I think that vibing needs to be received just as much as it's
yeah.
given out. But I want to work on this a little bit more, Camille. So
Sure.
you said it's a skill. How does one practice that skill? What is something that one needs to do to improve their level of becoming an active listener? Like what could someone do today from a practical standpoint?
I guess from a practical standpoint is think about it. Are you talking at this person or are you talking with that person? And I think just framing yourself in that way and being aware of that is helpful. Um, like I'd say, try to engage conversations in a different way. Try to be more conscious about it. It's more the awareness, And then the actual individual skills, you need to learn how to focus, right? Concentration. So, taking care of your health and your mind, and also practicing being completely focused on one object. So, I'd say most people watch Netflix nowadays. Try to genuinely practice like watching a movie without having your phone on or anything like that. Just being focused on one thing. And it might be uncomfortable, but that that is a sign that this needs work. And meditation also extends that way. Um, and so, with other practical advice, I would say is next time you're in a conversation, do your best to tell yourself, okay, for whatever this person's going to say, I'm not going to have anything in my mind. I'm waiting till the last second to respond to it. So pay attention to the cadence of their words. Pay attention to the inflection, the accents, whatever. Like focus, like hyper focus on that. And that way you don't have anything in your mind. It's just like, that made me feel this. Why did it make me feel like that? I think like those can be practical examples of ways to develop the active listening part. Of course, then there comes some micro skills like eye contact, sometimes nodding, not too much nodding, of course, and not too much eye contact. It's all about a balance and practicing those micro skills as well.
No.
And also, body language is huge, right? That can we can go on a huge thing, and I used to study body language. I read like 3 books on body language back in the day. So pointing your feet towards the person, being open, with your chest out, not hiding your hands, having your palms open, that sort of stuff, not looking too much down, and also not looking too much up. Those are all micro skills. So I'm not sure if we want to go down that road.
I mean, we may end up there, but there's a lot of good things here worth reiterating, right? And I think that first part of, if you're really in the present, listening to what's being said, I think the parts of your body language automatically piece itself to the way it's supposed to. Because when you're actively saying like, oh crap, I gotta point my feet this way. Oh man, I'm looking too high up. I gotta look down.
Yeah.
Number one, you're no longer in the present. Like you're already distracted. And number two, you're not actually paying attention. You're trying to replicate the look of
Mm-hmm.
someone that's paying attention to be kind to the other person and be likable, I think. Because I think if you're genuinely in the present, in many ways, you're already doing a lot of those things. It's just indicated that those are the similarities of someone that is fully paying attention. But your example of using real life things that we do anyways is actually, I think that's such a good example, because I'm definitely guilty of this. I think when I watch Netflix, sometimes I look down at my phone and I try to come back, or my mind drifts off and I look again. Unless I'm in a movie theater, I feel like I really haven't watched a movie from beginning to end without distractions. With audiobooks, I listen to audiobooks when I go on my walks. And it's a great way for me to forget that I'm walking, because I hate every part of walking. My feet are on fire, but the audiobook is actually meant to distract me from the pain. But at the same time, there's a second distraction that happens when I'm thinking about other stuff and no longer paying attention. The difference in those examples is that I could always hit back on and watch the scene that I missed on Netflix. I could always rewind and listen to that part that I missed on an audiobook. But when you miss that part in a conversation, you've missed that part. Even asking the person to repeat it, A, risks the fact that it may be disrespectful, but B, you may just never get the same flow of the conversation back after breaking the flow in order to get them to reiterate what they were saying earlier. So practicing it on your consistent habits today to set yourself up for the big game, the big game being when you're across that person having the conversation, I think it's worth noting. I really believe that the first step in lending a helping hand is lending a ear. Like you have to be willing to listen before you can help. Otherwise, you're actually trying to help people with the bias of what you already think they're suffering, right? You're letting yourself really determine what you think they need help with, where in your example of actually really digging and finding out the real meaning behind that coworker being mentioned, in many ways they'll give you that layer of themselves when you can bring the shield down. But that shield, right, that shield is something that's worth noting, is we all on any given day have a virtual shield that we put up every single day in the fear of having our persona in many ways attacked. And when I talk about persona, it's not necessarily who you are to the core, it's who you're projecting, right? You're projecting it to the world. And sometimes that gets attacked by counterintuitive thoughts or contradictory thoughts. And you're keeping the shield up to not let someone in enough to really dissect and prove your way of believing wrong, right? And that sometimes I think is very frequent in religion. When I was raised in a Muslim household, I mean, I was raised in a way where even if I started questioning why something is right, I was responded with the fact that it's a sin to be like doubting that this is correct. And like I was actually born having the fear, and I was raised having the fear of asking questions even if I wasn't sure about it. It's not necessarily that I felt like it was wrong. I just wasn't sure. I needed to validate that this is where I wanted to plant my flag, and this is how I wanted to live, and this is the belief I wanted to subscribe to. But when you're not being given the capability of doing your own research through conversations, through searches, through being challenged, I feel like you're really not committing and surrendering to the thing that you believe in. I think you're allowing yourself, with lack of information, to go down this path. It's almost like if someone told you that to get to Norway, you go in this one direction and they give you a vague version. You're not asking questions, you're just going in that direction for the rest of your life, hoping eventually you'll see Norway. Right. And I think that that questioning and that researching and sometimes that doubting is necessary in order for you to validate that. Do you find that to be a big part of that, why there's a shield up, and maybe even like how to bring down that shield? I imagine that the state of being vulnerable and allowing yourself to really show who you are almost brings down their shield in alignment. Do you find that to be the case?
I'm gonna have to be careful with this one because I've actually recently discovered that the way I view other people's emotions, like their shields, um, I almost see as an obstacle. At least I used to, and now I'm working on that because at the same time, people are entitled to their own emotions and how they feel, and you can't control that. What you can do is you can't kick down the door, but at least you can open it and invite them in. And you invite them in, and they choose to go through it. What I like to do is facilitate that invitation, and the way I go about it is asking them a lot of questions and trying to project myself in a way that is non-judgmental. And sometimes, I I have to admit that I I'm only human and maybe I'm looking at it through my own bias. So I don't understand what the person's going through, even though I may think I do, even though I may think that I know better than them. I I don't know what you're going through, and I don't know like why you think that way. So please help me understand. And if you come across in a way that is curious and not forceful, it does give you more of an opportunity to not necessarily break down their walls, but at least create a door. And also sharing your own vulnerabilities as well helps facilitate that too. But at the end of the day, it's about the other person and where they're at within their lives, right? If they are closed off or they're not ready to share that, it's something that has to be respected. And even though I personally believe that it can limit growth and progress, I have to acknowledge not everyone is in the same place that we are. And I get frustrated, don't get me wrong, I get really frustrated because I almost feel like it's a personal failure on me that I didn't make the environment comfortable enough. But more and more I realize, with more conversations and more people I meet, is just sometimes people aren't ready, and I just have to accept that.
I think that's a really good point from the perspective of should we be taking shields down, right? Like, should that be our objective in any conversation? And I think universally, people want to connect. And I think that universally, they want to be able to bond and have happy and meaningful relationships. And I think that the comfort level or where they are in their journey will dictate whether or not they're willing to take that risk in that circumstance, right? Like just because they don't open up to you doesn't mean they don't open up. Just because they may have given their whole life story to their parents, their kids, their significant other, but maybe they won't to a stranger until in the first 5 minutes. So I think that in many ways there are other circumstance outside of whether you did the right things or not, right? It may be where they are in the life. They may be going through the fire right now and they have no intention of stopping in the fire to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
They want to get out of it first, right? And there may be other circumstance where they were maybe raised like I was to not talk to strangers, right? And they were raised even like, I was raised in Saudi Arabia, and I was raised around family members that looked a lot like I did. And when we started seeing other ethnicities, it was a culture shock for my parents when we first came here. So even that was a big part of what makes the shield even larger, where some people naturally had disadvantages, even if they were the nicest people in the world. And again, a lot of unlearning that was necessary in order for me to get past that level. But I think more than anything else is being able to decide from yourself what you're willing to share, and also being able to gauge and read the room, right? And I think that when I share my side of the story, which I do very openly now, it's the realization that I had that it's only when I shared my entire life story that I truly felt free, that I truly felt unbreakable, that I felt like no one can hurt me. I know that I haven't really committed a crime or anything that if I shared it, that my life would be ruined. I just think there's a lot of things that I've been hurt with that was very difficult for me to talk about. And in many ways, when I hid that part of myself, I'm already strategically navigating conversations around that topic to make sure we don't get there. So therefore, it's no longer an organic conversation. There's a little bit of strategy involved. But the second that I decided that I was going to publish my own book, and between these two covers, I decided to package every single thing that I possibly could about my hurt, about my reinvention, about my ups and downs, my ebb and flow in life. I really feel like at that moment, the second that I knew it's up on a shelf right now and anyone can go in and pick it up, any stranger or anybody that's known me in my past can pick it up and now know who I am, that level of freedom is just unbeatable. And now that I've tasted that, I don't know if I'm ever ready to go back into hiding again. Right. I actually, when a bad thing happens, I like hitting record on a microphone or opening up my social media or even like chatting with other people that I know about it, because it allows me to actually unleash and unload into a different environment, like putting it down on a journal, putting it down
Mm-hmm.
somewhere where I now have actually allowed myself to get it out of my system. I also do respect that not everyone feels the same way. And I think in that manner, what you said was really, really powerful, which is the idea that other people could be nothing like you. And I believe that so extremely, man. Like I feel like you and I are like not even the same creatures. Like we are like our the way that I was raised is so different from the way that you were raised, which means that the things that I saw in my life every step of the way had a completely different lens from what you had.
Mm-hmm.
Like we can't even comprehend information. Like the things that we're consuming while watching the same thing at the same time, we're going to get a very different perception through all the filters that we've placed and all the shields that we have put up over time. And as a result of that, it's ludicrous to think that someone should be in the same place of understanding as you are. So that gives me an instant level of empathy of saying that I truly am coming in with no judgment, because who am I to judge you when I
Yeah.
literally know nothing about you? When people say like you don't know anything about me, like I take that so literal. Like we literally know not even 1%. And even if you told me your life story, I don't actually know if that's your entire story. And even if you did the best that you could, I don't know if you were able to articulate it to the best of the experience itself. And not to mention the perception filters that were there. So the fact that I will never truly know the real you gives me that level of empathy of saying I can't judge anything that you've done. Even if I see something as what I consider to be bad, like do I really know the deeper meaning, the root meaning behind it?
Mm-hmm.
It's actually quite fascinating that you and I can get in the same room and find a way to vibe and articulate to each other in a way that we both can comprehend with our own filters through all those levels that we've kind of had to go through to get to where we are. So that level of empathy is needed, and that level of judgment needs to go, because that when you start understanding that we're so different from each other, how can you judge someone just because they don't have your level of ambition? If
Yeah.
someone is lazy and they're always playing games and they don't want to do this, the things that I would typically see as like bad, 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 how do I actually know that's bad to them? Right? There might be a deeper meaning that actually allows them to get out stronger on the other side. So yeah, man, that the judgment part and the empathy part, I really hope we get to dedicate so much more time in this podcast show to really dive in. Because to me,
Yeah.
I think those are some of the biggest pieces of today of this entire conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's kind of hard for me to say too because I feel I'm on both sides of the fence here where I feel like empathy is a skill to be developed. There are certain aspects that you can develop, but also maybe it's also a kind of talent as well because then you hear like like the extreme examples of psychopaths and sociopaths, right, that don't have that, or maybe they just are good at compartmentalizing it, and then that leads to a whole new conversation and this whole new kind of meaning. But I think you touched on some great points. The fact that even if I sat down with you and we shared everything about everything that we can remember. We've even forgotten a lot of details. And we have we have what we feel, and then we translate it into thoughts, and then we translate it into language, then we express it and the other person receives it. So there's already like five different ways that you get lost in translation. And that is like in itself. And also with time everything changes, and when you access those memories again they change as well. So there's absolutely no way that you can fully comprehend why people do the way do the things they do or why they feel the certain ways they do. You can only naturally try to fill in the blanks with your own experience. So then by doing so you have to acknowledge that you don't have the full story, and there's no way you can judge this person because you're filling in your the blanks with your own thoughts, with your own emotions, with your own judgments. And on top of that as well, it's I think it's quite fascinating that you're never going to know who you are as a person either. Like even within a year, I'm shocked with the things I've learned about myself within this past year. And I know that the journey to understand yourself will never end. And with experience you get more of yourself, but at the same time too you have to acknowledge that this is a never-ending journey, and that's what makes it exciting because you can choose who you want to be. You can't necessarily change certain aspects of yourself, but at least you can go to in a direction that works for you, and to share that with other people and to understand their journey as well is something that I think a lot of people want to learn about and a lot of people want to talk about. And that's why I love talking with you so much because we have a genuine passion for that. And we can talk about it for hours. So I think we're going to have a lot of interesting conversations surrounding the empathy and the judgments, because I think that is a sense a certain kind of restriction that we place upon ourselves too. And like you said, once we eliminate those, there's a sense of freedom, but also there's this sense of peace. You know, that you don't have this inner conflict within yourself. And when you extend that to the world around you, it's just beautiful how everything comes in harmony.
We started by talking about the advice that we sometimes get about being yourself in environments, and sometimes we don't really understand literally what that means until we start diving in a little bit more and understanding that the more you start appreciating how unique you are as a human being based on everything we just talked about in this last hour, you really start to appreciate the fact that there's something beautiful about your uniqueness. Like you're your own snowflake. Like no one in the world has experienced the exact order and path of experiences combined and the evolution that you've gone through that allowed you to be yourself. And you allowing yourself to share that part of you is such a gift. You allowing yourself to be that is such a gift. And when I get to be that in an environment where I'm that person in my own circle of friends, I'm that person in my relationship, I'm that person in my family, it's such a beautiful thing. And it just gives you that level of self confidence that I feel like many of us have lost over the years because we maybe disliked ourselves, because we didn't see the unique side of us as a gift, but rather the outlier, the outcast, the one that didn't belong. And because of that, we had experiences of loathing, self-loathing, that we disliked who we were. But when you start realizing that that unique experience allows you to share things with the world that has never been experienced before, I get excited about the idea that no one out there is looking for the next Oprah. No one out there is looking for the next Muhammad Ali. Like, they've already seen that. They're out there looking for the first you, that breath of fresh air of a new experience that they've never seen before, the collective experience that makes who you are you. And when I started having that approach in my relationships, I have been far more happier than I've ever been, because I know that when I'm in the relationship that I am today, that I've earned that relationship based on truly being myself as that unique individual that I am, not by these strategic facades that I was creating, these projections that I was making, this impression that I was making that allowed me to get second dates, third dates, and many other dates later, and thus being in a relationship. Because in those environments, I would have the thought process of any day now, she'll figure out that this isn't who I am. And based on that, I'm holding on by a string. I'm becoming clingy. I'm becoming jealous of the next guy that gets her attention in the same manner, because I realize that I'm trying to sell myself by putting out someone that I'm not. When you start getting into relationships based on the fact that you didn't project this facade version of you, but by this unique individual that you love, you start becoming in a relationship where you're not saying like any day now she'll figure it out. You're in this relationship saying, I'm so glad she loves me for who I am. And as a result of that, you're not feeling that jealousy or threatened that any day you're going to lose her. You're like, hey, I'm so glad that I get to be myself. And in my opinion, this story gives you far more longevity in being able to sustain a happy relationship than trying to put out an act for so long to a point where you actually lose your identity. That's the scariest part, is when you actually become the character, as we see in Hollywood happen quite frequently, right? With method acting, that some of these incredible actors actually need to see a therapist after, or they actually have personality disorders and issues based on the fact that they've committed to this role so hard that they lose a part of themselves. It's scary to think that we could be subconsciously doing that by trying to chase what we think that these people want rather than valuing the unique individual that we are within ourselves.
Yeah, I think back too that there are so many instances in my life where I was playing a part that didn't belong to me. That I thought in order to fit in to this idea of either what the group wants or expects of me or what this person wants or expects of me, I have to go about certain and do certain things in that manner, which again is, if you think about it, it's an assumption that you make about the other person as well. They may not want it, and so you lose out on opportunity. Like what? Like it doesn't make any sense. What is the advantage of playing a role that you think the other person may want, and because maybe they do want it or maybe they think they want it, but again, it's non-sustainable. You lose a part of yourself, and what if they don't want it? Then you end up losing anyway. So why not
Right.
just be yourself, right? I know it's easier said than done, and especially there's all these kind of pressures, and we want to genuinely fit in. We are social creatures at the end of the day, but when you are unapologetically yourself, the power that it extends to with other people, it inspires them to be themselves too. And you know what? If people don't like you for who you are, then that's also a good thing. That means you're being honest, right? That you're not fitting into a mold for someone else. You're on the right path. And I think you can make genuine connections that way as opposed to with the persona like you mentioned. And I really love Carl Jung's view on the persona and collective unconsciousness and all of that. When they connect with just the persona, they're not connecting to you. They're connecting to your social mask that you wear to that masquerade. So you don't get that same satisfaction, that same sense of belonging that you would normally. So if you're feeling lonely and yet you have all these friends, take a good look at yourself. Are you acting in a way that is you? Because if you're lonely, I think that it loneliness comes from you not being able to express yourself in the way that you want to. And I've been in friend groups where we've been hanging out and I feel miserably alone. Like, and we could be having fun whatever, but there's still something missing there. And what I discovered over the years is if I'm just myself, and even if I'm disliked, I don't feel alone. And even when I am alone, I feel connected to myself. So having that connection is good enough, and it's enough for me. But that took a long time, almost 30 years in the making, and very like I had to be very deliberate with my work on myself.
Like you said, it's a lifelong journey, and I imagine that even 5 years from now, you'll probably have a different take,
Hmm.
if not a better understanding of yourself and how you want to treat yourself. What you're talking about is a fine line between being selfish and having self-respect, right? Because a lot of people say like the if I start doing the things for my own reasons and not that anyone else wants to do it, I'm being selfish. And there's credit to that. It's like I was reading a book recently, and I'm trying to figure out which one because I get through a lot of audiobooks these days. But it was a conversation around um, there's a huge difference between being selfish and being first, right? And an example was if someone decided to put out cake in a party and they decided to slide to what we talked about with not judging. So this is very important to highlight, which is just because what they see may not be you may consider to be bad doesn't mean that it's bad for them. But there's a second part of the asterisk, which is it doesn't mean you have to stick around, right? It doesn't mean you need to spend time. So an example of that is there's a period in my life where I started getting used to the habit of just sitting around, not doing anything productive, eating junk food, playing video games, watching movies, and spending time just gossiping and not really getting anything done. And without realizing it, which is the scariest part, in the moment, without realizing it, I was going back on every single thing I've worked so hard on. I was losing a lot of my motivation. I was gaining a lot of weight. I was losing a lot of money. I was actually losing a lot of confidence and ability to socialize in public without realizing it. And one day I had that realization and I said, man, I can't believe I allowed myself to get to this position. I need to make a change. Now, I never saw the fact that there was other people that were doing that. I'm going to take that back. I'm not going to say I never saw it. It took me a while to get past it. I did see that as a very negative thing for everybody, and I actually judged people for some time. But I've evolved. And in my evolution, I started realizing that I can't judge them for that. Maybe some people's definition of happiness is escapism. Maybe what they like to do is actually connect and build relationships in an environment of something that they're comfortable doing, not going out, but sitting in their room where they're most comfortable and socializing and building relationships. Maybe what drives them is talking about other people and nostalgia rather than ideas like I like to talk about. And I couldn't judge them for that. But the indicator was to love them from a distance, is to give them that appreciation and saying, hey, you live your life. I'm going to go and do what I want to do because this isn't serving my definition of happiness. And a lot of people sometimes would see that as selfish. It's like you're selfish for cutting people off based on the fact that you think you're better than them, right? Like you think you have this big mindset that what they're doing is bad and what you're doing is good. What makes you so self-righteous? But it's not about being self-righteous. It's about the fact that these things don't align with your core beliefs. And when you start having a better understanding of what your core beliefs are, and you start getting that gut feeling that something's not right, you feel like crap the next day. It's kind of like when I pig out one day, I almost get into a mentality where I don't care. I don't care that I'm pigging out at an all you can eat sushi. But the next day I feel guilt. I feel bad. I feel like I let myself down. And I really feel like I'm the worst human being sometimes because I went against my game plan. And as a result of that, it's that reminder, the reminder that this isn't aligned with what you're subscribing to. And it's that reminder that is the best indicator, I think, that life gives you to make a change and do things differently. The beautiful thing is that just because you fell off track doesn't mean that the race is over. You can always get back on track. And I think life is more about getting back on track as many times as you can until you get to your goal, rather than the fact that you need to do it perfectly. There's a common statement which is that progress over perfection, right? And that perfection is the enemy of progress. And I believe that wholeheartedly, because the more you start obsessing over doing things perfectly, the less likely you're going to do it, because you're constantly living in fear that any moment now you're not going to have it aligned the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think perfectionism too is something I struggled with for a long time, and it just leads to paralysis because it's first of all, when you do something for the first time, even you're never going to do it right, right? You have to expect that if it's something new, it's not going to work out perfectly. So you have to be able to forgive yourself in that regard, and look at yourself in a way that is forgiving and kind, because well, like, what does beating yourself up do for you in that regard? It just ends up creating more resentment. Of course, there is room for constructive criticism with yourself, but it has to be in a kind way. It has to be in a way that actually is constructive, not destructive. So I think the way you touched on those points too brings up a lot of thinking around, how do you make progress? Like, when it comes to people in general, you have to find your core values, and you have to find people that you want to share them with. And the people that don't share them, maybe they have other core values, but you can also look at that from afar, or you can try to examine them and try to see if somehow you can make it work. And at the end of the day too, if it doesn't, you can always redefine what the relationship means. There's no point of trying to force yourself in a situation where it doesn't work, harming yourself, and you end up harming them. So it's finding a way to make it work. Sometimes it might mean saying goodbye. Sometimes it might mean, hey, if the example you use that some people love escapism, that maybe you can, when you need to escape, you can escape with them, and that's what it is. And you can always extend the invitation for them, but remove the expectation that they should be, accepting those invitations all the time, or that they should have the desire to accept the invitation. Maybe it's just, a difference in those core values. And then once you determine your own core values and who you want to be, then it's about moving towards them too. And sometimes things are going to have to change.
Yeah, the redefining friendship part is important. And I like the way you phrase it even better than I did, because I think my thing could be misunderstood as saying just cut them off. And I like that you redefined it in that way, which is think about what that friendship means to you and how much participation you want to have around that, right? And I think that's important. But it's also worth noting that if you stay friends with them for the reasons that you feel like we're not
Mm.
aligned with their core value, it's no longer their fault, right? Like for
Yeah.
example, if punctuality, which I'm very big on, right? Like I am one of my biggest pet peeves in the world is when people are late or don't show up on an expected time and there wasn't any discussion about it. And when that happens and someone has a reputation of being the person that's late, and before you assume like make you mad, but you chose to stay friends with them and you send them an invitation and they show up late again, you can't really get mad about that. At least not at them. You know what their reputation is, and you chose to be friends with that, right? So it's like you also have to drop down the expectations on how they show up, not just whether they show up
Hmm.
and who they are when they show up, right? Like some of them may not be as active listeners as we'd like them to be. Some of them may have a different way of conversing, but if they were given an invitation based on what you already know about them, it's really you needing to, it's your responsibility to set that expectation and being there, or else it's going to be an unhappy space, or it's going to be a lot of conflicts and frictions and judgments being thrown around. And that's just never a good time for anyone. So I do love that emphasis on creating that space that does accommodate people based on who they can be in that environment. Because if you're not letting them be who they can be, that just goes against everything we talked about like owning your core value, which is what we want people to do begin with. But the other part, the kindness component, which I think is a big piece of this, is in many ways, as much as I like talking about what's modern, I also like thinking about what's practical, historically, what's been practical. And one thing that we all know historically over and over again is without a doubt that kindness gets you further than hate, right? And we've seen that happen. We can see that happen every day of your life without even noticing it. You know, a thank you and a please can get you more than not saying it. A do you mind and asking them for a favor gets you further. Being able to do a favor for someone results in some, more often than not, a better relationship with that human being. So kindness does get you further than hate. And this brings me back to a story, and you may remember this, Camille. I don't know if we ever talked about it, but it's a fun children's story about when the sun and the wind got into a competition together, and the wind saw a boy running across the field with a jacket on, and the wind was like, "Son, I bet I can get that jacket off that kid." And the sun was like, "Okay, you're on." And the wind was starting to blow so hard at the boy, hoping that the jacket would come off. But the harder that the wind blew, the harder that the child was holding onto that jacket and actually zipping it up and making it tighter. And it was even more difficult for the wind to blow that jacket as aggressively as he tried to do it. Then it was the sun's turn. And all the sun did was increase his warmth. You know, he got warmer. And as a result of increasing his warmth, the boy took the jacket off for him and just basically got rid of it rather than trying to aggressively blow it off him. And the big takeaway from that story was simply the idea that kindness, if you're kind to the human being, they'll just simply offer up what it is that you're worried that they may not offer up, rather than the opposite, which is aggressively trying to take that off them. And that one always stuck with me, which is the idea that you really, you know, when we think about a world where we're all trying to create authentic connections and meaningful relationships, you have the capability of doing that by leading with kindness. And I want to make sure that kindness doesn't neglect what we just talked about with self respect. Kindness doesn't mean that you get into full servitude mode and you give up what you believe in order to make the other person happy. Kindness means that even if you disagree with someone, you can still approach it in the right way. You know, it's still your responsibility to have those conversations in the right way. One of the most difficult conversations that I ever had in my life was a conversation that I had with my dad that was very, very tough on cultural beliefs and religion, along with my mom, and the emphasis that they had on my relationships in the past, including an engagement that didn't work out, right? I was engaged, it didn't work out, and it disappointed my parents. And for a very long time, there was this floating friction between myself and my parents. And one day, when I started reinventing myself over the last couple of years and really becoming the happiest that I've ever been, I had another conversation with my dad where he resurfaced the fact that I'm not in a relationship, I'm not married, and all these other things that was really concerning for him. And I was really proud because I was able to have a conversation with him that I don't think I've ever been able to have with my parents before, which is simply emphasizing that I am the happiest that I've ever been in my life. And at the end of the day, isn't that what you want for your son? Isn't what you want for your son is just to be happy? Because I tried it the other way, Dad, and I was the most miserable I've ever been. Like, I've never been more depressed in my life, and I've tried it that way. But now that I'm doing it my way, I'm more happier than I've ever been. Isn't that what's more important? As a father, isn't that what you would want to hear? And I noticed that it instantly changed the dynamic of my relationship with him. You know, he backed off, although he would bring it up once in a while, because at the end of the day, he has his core beliefs of how to raise his kids. The conversations are a lot more fluid. It's a lot more sentimental, and it's a lot more, it's a lot kinder. It doesn't have the aggression and the challenges that it does. So I think there's that layer of how to communicate ideas in a way that allows the recipient to still respect your disagreements and your beliefs. And, you know, with these friends that I use in our example, that I chose to kind of reconfigure my relationship with them, you know, I was excited about the idea that I got to sit with one or two of them and actually say, like, hey, if you ever need help down the road, I'm around with open arms. Like, you need something, let me know. But at the same time, Like there are some things that I disagree very strongly with, but it's not like I'm not going out of my way to change that. Because to your point, the idea of trying to change someone doesn't benefit anyone in that relationship nor the relationship in itself. The best thing that you can do is allow yourself to communicate what you can help with. And if that person is interested in helping you, they'll be reaching out to you on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, that's true. And I think you set a beautiful example with the conversation you had with your dad, because you were opening up and vulnerable to him about that, and you saw instantly the benefit of doing so. And also with the friendships you described as well, you know, still genuinely offering a helping hand and meaning it. You know, hopefully they saw how genuine you were in that moment, and from there, it's about it's about doing the things that are helpful for both of them, and both parties. I mean, so you and the friendships, you left it open, so you can also see what they want, and you aren't trying to change them, but at the same time too, they can also have the invitation to change themselves if they decide. So I think lending that helping hand and offering it when needed, it does do that. And to your point about leading with kindness, I think there's a reason why in our society we try to teach children not to cheat, right? Not to lie. Like, even though lying can get you so far, and it can definitely be a shortcut, and you can't argue that it has zero benefits. Sometimes it does, but I think I was listening to someone say this. I can't remember who it was, but the reason why you teach people to not cheat in like games in general, like in chess, for instance, is because you want the opportunity to be invited for more games. Because who wants to play with a cheater, right? And when you get that opportunity to be invited for more games, you have more opportunities to grow, and you have more opportunities to have those connections, and those connections can create new ones as well. And ultimately, you could be led down new avenues that can provide you with some sort of benefit that maybe you weren't aware of. So I I think that the kindness and compassion you described is very important to lead with. And also, it has to come from the understanding too, is that this is a whole unique person like you described. This is a whole new experience, and they have reasons why they think the way they do. So opening up that conversation and understanding why they have those beliefs and why they have those values in time, well, checks yours as well, and also provides you with new perspectives and new ways of being that maybe are more in line with what you think. It's just a matter of having that conversation and that discussion.
And this is also where it gets really interesting is a lot of the examples that we've been using is one-to-one conversations, as if there isn't any other variables. But the truth is, when we put the emphasis on better conversations and growing through them, it doesn't need to be limited to just a one-person conversation. It could definitely be a group conversation. As a matter of fact, it doesn't even need to be a conversation that you're in, right? You can literally you look up conversations that happen around topics of interest or individuals of interest. I think of it kind of like music. When you see that this artist is collabing with this other artist to put out a track, if you love those artists, you get really excited about the idea that they're
Mm-hmm.
coming together and putting together what you hope will be a masterpiece. And I think that's the same case with in the environment of podcasting, for example, is you could go and listen to a podcast where this host that you love brought in this guest that you love, and all of a sudden you get to hear what that sounds like. To me, it's very much like when I listen to podcasts like Joe Rogan, and I get
Mm-hmm.
really excited when he brings in individuals like Kanye West, like Elon Musk, and even like psychiatrists. Like he really focuses on different avenues because I think in many ways that's Joe Rogan presenting an opportunity for people to learn not just in one subject matter, but going far beyond that. And I think that gets really exciting. So there's an emphasis for individuals to not just limit yourself to your own conversations, because you can only have so many conversations a day and so many conversations in your lifetime, that if you're only relying on that for growth. And not to mention that the conversations of who you have them with will be quite frequent with the same people, right? It'll be reoccurring. You're really limiting your growth and your capabilities of seeing new ideas and new opportunities. I think it's when you start extending that, be it that you go out and join a soccer club and you meet some new people that allows you to have different conversations. Be it that you start listening to podcast shows, hopefully like this one, because our goal with this one is exactly that, is presenting conversations to you. Even though you may not be part of it, you have an opportunity to reflect and respond back to us and let us know your thoughts, which I'm really excited about. Even if it's part of following specific accounts on social media so that you could see what type of wisdom that they're sharing and what type of insights so that you could pick them up day at a time whenever you need it in order to really boost you. Like if you need to follow accounts that give you motivation, they're out there. If you need to follow accounts that are very hypothetical and very philosophical, they're out there. If you need controversial ones, they're out there. If you need ones that are gossip, unfortunately, they're also out there. You can find what you're looking for along with the community that you want to spend time with. And when you start spending time with those, you will find yourself almost replicating the feeling of being in like a lounge with a group of 20 people and you're listening to someone in that 20 people group talk, and you're taking ideas from them along with the other 19 and 18 people that are there. So you're really giving yourself the benefit of picking up and learning from other people. To your point about which I absolutely love, being kinder to get invited to more games, is you need to also do your part to get invited.
Exactly.
And it doesn't just mean kindness. It also means that no one keeps inviting that person that just sat there and listened every single time they went out. Right. At the end of the day, you're just a share of the bill, which makes their bill a little bit cheaper. So at the end of the day, that's not really my definition of a good friendship. I think that there is a responsibility of playing a role in your community and your surrounding. What that role is can be changed and redefined based on the value that you provide. But you always have the ability to do that. And the beautiful thing, Camille, is when you get really good at articulating what that value is, you don't even need to have a group to do that. You can openly pour that into the world. And what naturally happens is people that are looking for that type of value will find you because they're on the receiving end. There are those people that are looking for you. And as a result of that, they'll find you. And this is why this was, I think, a big part of my argument with social media and why I'm for it is because it really gives you the ability to find yourself a community that maybe you didn't have once upon a time. Those individuals that are afraid because they're lonely, that they couldn't find people with common interests, they don't have to give that as their only excuse anymore. Through the tap on a screen, they could find a hundreds, if not thousands, of people that are in the same community that are maybe even local that they could meet up with in person. So I get excited about the fact that conversations are infinite. There is no limitations. You have the ability on any given day. You could spend all of today just listening to a handful of podcast episodes, handful of videos, handful of conversations. And what happens every single time that I think, Camille, is every conversation and every experience that it unlocks a different part of your brain. And when it unlocks a different part of your brain, it allows you to think just a little bit differently. And that may result in a new opportunity that never happened. This podcast is a great example of that. Something that was said in one of our conversations unlocked a part of our brain that says, hey, what if? And then that what if turned into an execution plan. And here we are today. It doesn't just stop at that. If people really sit down and think about what resulted in them doing the things that they do, the good, the bad, the day-to-day, the habits, I guarantee you it'll be associated with either one conversation or one experience that unlocked a part of their brain that evolved into something else. I'm right now in the process of putting out a gratitude and productivity journal in the month of September. And this concept was actually inspired to me based on a conversation that I had with my girlfriend. During the lockdown period, we didn't have the opportunity to go out on dates like we'd like to. So we spent a lot of our dates just sitting in the car and having conversations. And one day when we were sitting in the car, we both saw that we had a commonality in the passion for using journals. And in the conversation of talking about journals, what we started realizing very quickly is that there was a lot of flaws, a lot of things we didn't like about the journals that we were using. So one day I came back and I opened up a notebook and I drew a vertical line right in the middle On the left hand side, I wrote down things that we love about our journals. And on the right hand side, we wrote down things that our journals are missing. And we brainstormed that entire date and we built out this joint chart of all the things that we loved about the journals that we use and all the things that was missing. And what we decided to do was merge the two and create what I think is going to be the go-to system and the go-to tool for anyone that wants to achieve productivity and better productivity. And it came out of a conversation that unlocked a part of our brain that made me say, hey, what if? And that what if resulted in us creating a chart, and the chart resulted us in releasing a product that's going to be coming out. So you think about how often that happens. It only happens in high acceleration if you increase the frequency of the conversations and experiences that you're having. Maybe that ties in with your version of why you went to school in Poland. Maybe that ties in with your version of relationships that you went in or went out of. Like I'm sure there's some stories there, but I'd love to get your thoughts on that concept.
I I subscribe to it too. I think that what you put your attention to dictates what you're going to do and who you're going to become. So that's why I talk about making conscious decisions on where you put your time in, right? If you want to improve, like I said, there is no shortage of content that is specific to what you're looking for. So it's about what do you want, right? Like once you discover what you want, and in your case, you're going to put out a fantastic journal that I'm definitely going to purchase when it comes out. So I hope you saved a copy for me. Um, then you can work on looking into gratitude or looking into maximizing productivity. And the best part is nowadays that we have the internet, you have conversations with experts in the field, people that have done the research, and you can listen to them and decide whether or not you think that this is something for you. And if not, you could find a new one because there's all this content out there, and it's about finding what works for you as well. And where that comes down to is putting your attention into those fields of interest or into what you want. And that goes to your point too, is being part of that community, whether it's listening to the conversations or finding, sub community as well. There's no shortage of that on Facebook. There are different forums available as well, and you can learn a lot from different people. And some people may have like radical views, and it's amazing to see if it fits, because then you have a group of people that don't subscribe to that belief. How do they react to that? Do they invite that conversation of why that would work, or do they instantly shut that down? And that's also something to take a good hard look at, because if you can actually see that happen, then that's a good sign that you're willing to be more open about these ideas that you haven't heard of or that you don't believe. And those ideas create this kind of space for the conversation. Does this piece of information fit for what I want to achieve or who I want to be? And sometimes the answer is, I don't think it does, and it doesn't. But a lot of times, what I found is those are the views that get me very fascinated, because if they're right, then you change your paradigm. If they're wrong, then you understand yourself more. And that goes back to these conversations and the growth that you can create from having these conversations.
Ah,
Whether or not they're agreements or disagreements, either way, it's a win. You just have to participate in them. And sometimes, at first, you're an observer, but then that can change. And once you become an active participant, I think that's where you get a lot more of the accelerated growth you're talking about.
absolutely. I mean, once you start becoming a participant, you're now directing that energy flow towards things that matter to you, subject matters and opinions and thoughts, and going deeper. How many times do you listen to like a podcast interview and someone will answer something and you're just hoping like, please interviewer, ask him this follow-up question because I really need to understand this better, but it never happens. And sadly, I have a feeling that's going to happen with our episodes sometimes. Maybe
Yeah.
we may not answer exactly, but this is why we're going to be doing it frequently enough to get in deeper. But it's that part of unlocking parts of yourself that allows you to grow. The second I got a taste of that, I gotta tell you, I crave better conversations all the time. I've been doing it through applications like Clubhouse. I do them through different podcast interviews that I go on. I do them with my community that I chat with all the time on social media. I do them with like taking in content from other people. I love listening to other podcast shows and reflecting back on it. And what I do more often than not, I realize that after I listen to a podcast show or I read an audiobook or I hear something that I saw in a video, I usually come to people like you and I bring that idea. I'm like, hey, want to get your take on this? What do you think? And that gets fun. Where you can take what was a participant
Mm-hmm.
version of dialogue and turn it into an active
Mm-hmm.
conversation with someone else because now the two of us gets to chop it down and actually get a base of the opinion. And I got to tell you, where it becomes real for me with what I believe in, and I think you know this because I've said it to you, is when I say it out loud for the first time. There's a lot of things that happens in my head that I think I believe in, but it's not until I say it out loud that I really feel like I believe in it because I've actually articulated it. Because when thoughts are flowing in your head, sometimes they're open ended. You leave it without a conclusion. You don't put a full stop at the end. You go to your next thought, and more often than not, it doesn't end up becoming the full circle of that idea that you had, and it goes down the drain. But when you have a conversation with someone, it's kind of awkward. You're kind of all over the place and a rambler if you start talking about something and all of a sudden you change topics 10 times and never put a period at the end of it. But that forces you to fully enunciate that idea. And I remember you and I talked once, and I shared a little bit about my relationship with my parents. And this is at the age 34. And I remember when I said it, I even stopped and said, wow, I've actually never said that out loud before. And the moment I said it out loud, like I could feel the emotions in play about how I really felt about it. I even remember I talked to you about a past relationship and how I felt about that relationship. And it wasn't until I said out loud, like the emotions came out of nowhere, and I was like, whoa, I didn't know this was still inside of me. So it's quite fascinating how far things can get when you allow yourself to truly reflect on a belief. And as you said, it'll either like challenge you and make you reassess why you believe in things, or it'll solidify and like now you have more supporting pieces from maybe subject matter experts that you can really use to justify why that is what you believe. But it's fascinating, man. And I'm really glad we're spending episode one on conversations more than anything else, because I think more than anything else, if someone is in an unhappy place in their life, whatever it is, right? It could be fitness, it could be emotional, it could be financial, it could be came out of a relationship, it could be lack of motivation, it could be relationships that they're in. If they are lacking happy, like if they're even like just wanting to change a part of their life, because I know you have a different view on what happiness means to you, and we'll get to that. But if you just want to change a part of your life, I think a great jumping off point is just to have better conversations with people, because it's those ideas that comes out of those conversations that will really allow you to navigate through the waters in a different way. And sometimes that was the missing piece. Sometimes just adding that piece to your way of thinking will give you the plan that you need in order to execute. And I think the execute is a whole new conversation that we
Yeah.
need to have. But I think today's one is very worthy to talk about conversations. And what's your parting thoughts here, Camille, when we think about how big conversations play a role in your life and what people could do with that? Would love to get your input on it.
Yeah, I think, like you said, especially if you're in a happy place, you're having a conversation with yourself all the time with your thoughts. So if you extend that to the world around you and the people around you, you're going to have unhappy conversations. And then once you become deliberate and look at the conversations you're having, sometimes it's easier to work on conversations with other people than with yourself, because you can see the blind spots of your own thoughts. Like if you have a new idea and you express it to someone and you can't explain it, then why can't you explain it? Maybe you don't know enough, or maybe you don't fully believe in it. And that's new information. But when you have it with yourself, you're not aware of that, because again, like you said, you can just put full stops, you can new thoughts swim through whatever. And when we have these conversations and make them meaningful, that's where real change occurs. Like you said, you can take from someone's experience a whole new understanding of life and apply it to yourself and choose whether or not the benefits from that experience and maybe even the cons from that experience matter to you. And if you focus on what you want and what conversations you're a part of, and if they're in line with your core values, you're unstoppable. You can just create this kind of forward momentum to becoming the best version of yourself and to understand more of yourself. And that begins with conversations and, like you so eloquently put, unlocking new parts of your brain that you weren't aware were there. I think being part of those conversations are very important as well. And that's why, like you and I will discuss, the execution is important. So that's where we talk about the active listening, the curiosity, how to speak effectively, and how to listen effectively. Like those skills are very important, and that took me a long time to learn, and I'm still learning, of course. So I think our conversation today about conversations is just the stepping stone to this whole new idea of personal development and growth. And I'm excited to see what comes next.
The beautiful thing about a podcast, unlike when like an artist releases an album, is when an artist first gives you an album, they can tell you that this is my best body of work. You guys are gonna love it. Hope you love it as much as I do. But in the world of podcasting, we're building in real time. And we're actually looking backwards. And what I hope at the very end of our season, we can look back and really be blessed and feel grateful about the ability to put out what I think may be our best body of work, and hopefully be able to present this to an audience where we start with conversations as our jumping point, and then we dissect each part of what they need to do step by step. Where if someone is in a place where they really need to figure out how to evolve their mindset or really change a circumstance in their life, I really hope that Modern Mindset becomes their go-to podcast to come back to, and an episode at a time. If it's about conversations, they'll look it up like table of
Yeah.
contents and say, this is the episode I want to listen to today, and use it as a guide and not just necessarily listening from beginning to end, even though we'd love that anyways. I'm not even sure how to wrap up a live YouTube video episode, but I think the best thing I can say is if you're listening and you got even 1 ounce of value between everything Camille and I chatted about today, please do hit the like and subscribe button down below. And we're going to be releasing this episode as well in audio format on all the major streaming platforms. So you can find a replay of this episode on Spotify, Apple iTunes, and Amazon Music, and many others once we get it up and running. So that way you can listen to the replays on audio format when you're on the go. If you go on a walk like I do, or if you want to listen to it while driving, you'll have the full capability of doing that very shortly. So we encourage you to continue showing up and giving us feedback, man. Like, it's hard in the podcast world because we kind of just look at each other's faces the entire time. And, I try to smile a little extra harder to let you know that you're killing it. But what helps even more is our audience members letting us know that they got tremendous value. Camille, as always, it's been a pleasure. And I can't wait to do it again with you in episode number 2.
Thank you as well. I can't wait for episode number 2 as well. And thank you, everyone, for listening.